simple as that from a business standpoint. From a creative point of view, it's unquestionably unlocking more creative avenues for us as filmmakers.
XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/xswd. The MKE600 is a shotgun microphone ideal for professional video camera applications. Maximal rejection of ambient side noises thanks to pronounced directivity. And because the MKE600 has a very good suppression of structure-borne noise, it makes one of the most versatile all-round shotgun microphones on the market.
Hello everyone, welcome to Pro AV Live. I'm joined today by Ollie Kenchington to casually chat through some Canon lenses. Well, lenses of any kind really. We'll probably be focusing on Canon obviously, but we can talk about anything we really want to. How are you today, Ollie?
Canon. They can't stop us, Carl. They can't stop us. How are you?
How have you been? It's been a while since we've been talking. How are you?
Yeah, I was trying to think. 3, 4 weeks? I don't know. It's been a while.
It's been a while since our last stream.
How long?
It has been a good couple of weeks since our last stream.
No,
it really has.
Definitely a long time.
Yep.
Too long.
Exactly.
But it's whereas my cameras will set up more or less permanently throughout April and May, I took them all down, and we had some minor fun and games just before we went on air, didn't we? It's
live production. I mean, it's always going to happen. Always going to happen.
It was very much just it works, leave it alone for months, and then it was like, now I need to shoot with this stuff. Take it all out. But there we go.
We got it fixed. You didn't need to mention it, and no one would have known any different.
I know. I'm sorry.
So thank you very much, everyone who's. Thank you for everyone who is watching it. Leave any questions that you have, by the way, in the chat. I very much want this to be just a casual discussion about lenses, what lenses Ollie uses, what he would like to be using, all this sorts of stuff. And so that works best when it is led by you sitting at home, what you want to know about, what lenses do you use on a day-to-day basis, what kind of cameras do you use, and do you have any recommendations that you want us to make as to what you could be using, all of that sort of stuff. Please just leave anything in the chat on YouTube or on Facebook, and we will bring it up as we go through. But I mean, lenses are a hugely important part of what we all do, right, Ollie? I mean,
Indeed.
they are crucial in many ways, just as important as the camera.
There's this term that's used an awful lot, ecosystem, and it gets used in loads of different fields, not just filmmaking and photography. And the lens ecosystem is a really, really important part of the kind of purchasing decisions that people make when they're buying cameras, which is kind of what gave us the idea for doing this chat. Obviously, there's an awful lot of talk at the moment about people renewing camera equipment and upgrading. There's loads of new cameras coming out this year. Although obviously the first thought is about the camera bodies and what they're capable of, the lens ecosystem is also a really big consideration. So that was kind of what led us down this path of lens discussion.
Absolutely. We might as well address it straight away because we've already had a comment about it, about the new R5 and R6. We are planning on doing some coverage and some streams on those cameras specifically. We're waiting to get a bit more time with a final model. They are now starting to ship, but because demand has been so big, I don't want to take them away from customers. So I'm just waiting for the right moment for me and Ollie to get some properly good time with one of those so that we can have a good play and then do a stream just about maybe each camera, maybe one on each, or maybe bundle them into one stream. Don't know, Ollie. But what are your first impressions?
No. Well, yeah, I mean, I've not touched it. I've not seen one. Absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever in terms of the launch thus far. And which has been difficult to sit in the sidelines and watch. I spent a big chunk of my professional life telling people to never judge anything from information written on a piece of paper, from just looking at specs of devices. And, and actually, I have to say, even I have found it challenging over the months in the lead up to these announcements not to fall into that trap of looking at spec written on a piece of paper and going, oh, wow, or oh, that sounds bad. Or, it's always in the testing. The proof of the pudding is always, getting your hands on it and actually shooting. And because I haven't been able to do that, I literally have nothing to add really of any value other than just comment on things that I've seen that other people have put out, which, I've watched on my iPhone screen. My Wi-Fi is down at home, so I've been watching a lot of stuff in very low quality in my bathroom, which is the only room I get 4G in at home. So I'm in no position.
I thought it was just to avoid the wife and kids.
Sure. What are you doing out there? I'm just watching. I'm trying to do work.
Getting his camera fixed.
I mean, I've not seen a huge amount of good quality stuff. I've only sort of seen low quality streamed stuff over socials and bits and pieces. And
absolutely fair enough.
I cannot wait to actually get my hands on the camera and do what I've done with other recent cameras, which is to shoot stuff and make it available for people to download. I think it's such an important part of the decision-making process is actually getting those files in your hands and seeing them without that veneer, with no color grading, with no tweaking. It's about as honest as it gets in this industry. Is just that captured image and then straight out. And I haven't had a chance to do that. I've not had a chance to get hold of stuff that other people have done yet. And so it's a bit of a mute conversation. So apologies to whoever asked that question. I don't have a huge amount to add, but I do currently own an EOS R, which is why I have a mixture of EF and RF lenses. And it's certainly would be my intention, in theory, hopefully, to at some point upgrade that R to an R5 because, again, absolutely, on paper, it seems like a logical upgrade to our R and seems to be kind of going up in quality across the board. So, and features, the improved focus and everything is going to be a huge bonus for us.
Because you've got quite a few RF lenses as well, right? As well as your EF
in fact, it wasn't until I was collating my lenses. So I keep looking down because they're directly in front of me. I meant to set up a second camera angle so you could see this beautifully arranged pile of lenses on my desk. But I realised that I'd used all the lenses, so I didn't have a lens to put on the camera. So on my C200, which is the main camera here, I've just stuck our 40mm pancake lens on, which is our it lives. It's so small. It lives in a bag just as a kind of an emergency lens, or if we need to do something super lightweight and pair our cameras right down to the bare minimum. That's why we have the 40mm Pancake, which is a really cool lens, actually, a really nice lens. But I've put that on my C200 so that I've got our main EF lenses available for me to pick up whenever I need them. And then I've also got our RF. So we actually have an equal split, not through design, but it didn't even occur to me till I was setting this all up. We have 4 RF lenses and we have 4 EF lenses. So
and these, just for clarification for the people watching at home, are not lenses that Canon have sent you for this stream or that I've sent you or anything like that. These are your actual lens bag. This is what you bring to jobs with you. They're the ones which you've chosen to stick your money into.
Exactly. With my little dodgy gaff-taped focal length written on them and everything.
There's nothing dodgy about that. I think everyone I've ever known in this industry does that.
a bit ragged now. I lent my 85mm actually to a friend of mine last week, and I don't normally loan out equipment because I'm super anal about it, and I always panic that someone's going to damage something. But this guy, he's very professional and a good friend of mine, so I was like, yes, you can borrow my lens. And when it came back, I just did a cursory. I waited until he'd left before I was, microscope checking for errors. But I did notice that he had worn down the little 85mm markings in permanent marker on the back. And I was like, what? You can't give a man his lens back. And it was just smudged millimeters. I couldn't tell. I had to pick it out of the bag to actually tell what lens it was. Appalling.
I think you can just replace the tape, but you should be right.
I didn't do that. I wrote over the top of it again.
Okay, fine. So do you want to talk us through the collection that you've got there and what your choices behind each one and why you've gone for what you've gone for?
Yeah, I should probably start actually by saying that I've mentioned this a few times, various points and various podcasts and webinars and stuff over the years. I did move away from Canon several years ago before moving back to them. And unlike a lot of people, I actually decided to, stupidly, sell all of my glass and didn't just switch bodies. Well, I did initially. I was deeply disappointed with the performance of the adapters that were connecting my EF lenses to the new bodies that I had invested in. And it just made it unusable for me, particularly in terms of stills with the autofocus and the lagginess of it or lack of function of it. And so I actually put up with it for a few months and then just thought, you know what, I sod it, let's just get rid of them all. And I had some really lovely lenses in there, and I got rid of them. And not all of them I've replaced. In fact, I think very few of them I've replaced. Funnily enough, I've kind of gone in slightly different directions. So if I never actually had the what they refer to as the Holy Trinity zoom lenses. I had, apart from one, I had the which ones did I have? I had the 70-200. And it was only the F4 one as well, so it was cheaper.
Okay.
These are lenses that I'd acquired, 10 years ago, and I think I even bought that secondhand. But it was a lovely lens. I really liked that 70-200 F4. And so that went. We did have the Pancake, sold that, and then had to rebuy it. So this one that's on the C200 is the second iteration that we've had. But when I went back to Canon and had to kind of reacquire lenses, which, as I say, was stupid and costly, but there we go. I started going with different lenses. I think possibly just to try and slightly mix things up. One of the first the first two lenses I got were the 16-35 EF, f2.8. Non-stabilized, which annoys me, but otherwise really lovely, really sharp. I used this lens for I think about 80% of the C300 Mark III first look film that I shot, and I love that. And I'd never had a wide zoom up until that point. I'd had wide primes, but I'd never had a wide zoom up until the point that I reacquired a load of Canon lenses. So 16-35 is great. 2470, I think, is kind of just one of those lenses you just have to own. It's it's such a utilitarian lens. It's a great focal length, a great range to cover. Again, no IS on the EF version, which is never used to be a problem for me. I'm not, I don't really take stills. If I do, it's only sort of just hobbyist stuff. So I've never really noticed it being a problem too much until more recently, where Canon have been putting more image stabilization, both digital and now mechanical, in the R5. They've been focusing more on image stabilization, and that's made me think about it more in terms of video. So interestingly, having now shot with the C500, the C300 Mark III, and the image stabilization in those cameras, it's making me more annoyed that certain lenses I have don't have the IS in them, which is a bit silly because the digital IS in those cameras is so good. One of the big benefits is that if you have non-IS lenses, it makes them IS. But it's a bit like having your cake and eating it. It's like, now I've been sort of shown what you can achieve when you're using these cameras in tandem with IS lenses. You want that kind of full chunk, and I think you yourself have talked about the amount of stops of stabilization that the R5 can give, up to 8 stops. But if you break that down and look at it, it's in combination with certain RF lenses, with certain built-in IS, and then working together.
Actually, quite an interesting point about the new R5 and the R6 is that 8 stops isn't always in combination. You would think it would be, and most of the time it is. But there are, if you look at the chart that Canon have released of lenses, there are lenses that achieve the full 8 stops, like, for example, their RF 28-70 f2, beautiful lens, that doesn't have IS in it. Oh, there we go. So that lens doesn't have IS in it. And yet, with the R5 and the R6, it achieves the full 8 stops of IS.
Very interesting, because I was looking at that chart last week, and because I don't use this lens very often, to be honest, it's probably the one I use least. And as such, when I was looking at it and looking at that data sheet, I'd forgotten that this doesn't have IS. But you're absolutely right; it doesn't have IS.
It doesn't.
Interesting. So
when I was talking to Canon about why that was, they said because it's one of their lenses which will communicate to the camera, they've actually programmed into it its field of view, so its image circle. And so because if the lens has a really wide image circle, the image stabler inside the camera has more space to move around, and so it can physically move the sensor and stabilize more than it would do with one of the other lenses that has a smaller image circle, even though they'll both cover the full frame sensor.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
I wonder also how much I should have done more research before saying, hey, Carl, we should talk about lenses. But I know that some of their RF lenses have this new nano USM, and they use a floating electronic system for the zoom mechanism. And I wonder if this is one of the ones that's got that. I know their new 7200 does. But possibly that does as well. That might have something to do with it. The nano USM and the electronics that's inside there might well help that work to the full 8 stops without needing to have built-in IS. Yeah, interesting. Well, that's cool. I mean, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about is, I love Canon's EF lenses. As I say, still have 4 that we use all the time. Oh, I should quickly add, this was the last EF lens that I hadn't mentioned yet, which is the 85mm f1.4, so not the 1.2. This is the newer 1.4. This does have image stabilization, really good stabilization, and I just love this lens. This lens is insane. It's so good. This friend who borrowed this last week, we've worked together. I get him to shoot for me quite often, and so he sees the images that come back from this lens. And he said, "Oh, can I borrow it for a shoot?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He's like, "I just love the look of that lens." And he was showing me some frame grabs when he came to drop the lens back. He's like, "Oh my God, this lens is so good. It's just so nice." And it does. It creates this really beautifully cinematic image. It's very the bokeh, the autofocus areas in the background just have a lovely appearance to them. And I love that focal length. It's great for interviews. The image stabilization. I shoot loads of stuff on my C200, so let alone the newer Cinema EOS cameras, which have the really good digital image stabilization. Even with the C200, which doesn't have that, using this lens handheld with the image stabilization on is perfectly good. I shoot loads of B-roll that way, handheld that lens, 50 frames, and occasionally you have to add a little bit of stabilization in post, but not often. So yeah, that's definitely my favorite lens. That's my go-to for any portraiture, any interviews, any kind of really sexy B-roll. Looks really nice. So that's kind of my EF lineup. And one of the things I want to talk about is the RF equivalents for some of these. So there's now an RF equivalent of the 85mm. There are more or less RF equivalents for most of them now. There's the 1535 RF, which is the RF equivalent of my 1635. And the fact it's 1535, what you find when you start to look at these RF lenses is there's normally 1, 2, 3, maybe sometimes 4 key characteristics of that lens, which are just a very slight improvement from their EF equivalent. So the 1535, you've got very slightly wider field of view with which Canon deemed to have acceptable lack of distortion. So it's 1 mil, but there's a little bit more there. The
1 mil on the wide end makes a big difference, actually. On the telly end, it makes no difference whatsoever.
I thought you were going to say a joke.
On the wide mil,
serious. Yes. You're absolutely right. Yes.
No jokes. What could there possibly be to joke about? Moving swiftly on.
Yeah, there's always something. This is the thing. It's kind of quite a nice game to play with the RF line. Is to what is it? So when they bring out a lens like, this is our 7200 RF. It's like, okay, it's easy to just fall into the trap of thinking, that's their RF mount equivalent of their 7200 EF. But it almost never is that easy. If you start drilling down into the technical specifications of these new RF lenses, they're often, for example, that lens, it's a third lighter, it's considerably shorter. It's got this floating electronic lens mechanism. It's got this nano USM. There's quite a lot, if not everything really, that's considerably better than its EF counterpart. They're often slightly brighter. So the 2870 is an f2. Whereas the 2470 EF, which is obviously there's now equivalent of that in the RF lineup, which does leave me wondering where this kind of sits, the 2870. But anyway, you have image stabilization on their 1535. You have image stabilization on their 2470, which you don't with the EF equivalents. There's almost always some little thing that's actually a nice little upgrade. So in terms of my RF lenses, I've got, you've just seen, the biggest and heaviest and most cumbersome, but also fantastic lens, the 2870. Non-IS, but f2, and you can see how they've achieved that. This is absolutely huge. It's a massive bucket collecting light for you on the end of your camera. I don't use it a huge amount, mainly because of the weight. That? Well, because obviously the only camera I have, the only body I have that has an RF mount on it is my R, which is obviously a tiny little thing. It is very imbalanced for video. Bearing in mind I don't really do hardly any stills with my R. It's very imbalanced for video, having this massive thing on the front of this tiny little mirrorless body. And I shoot handheld so much it just doesn't quite work. I think this is a lens that I will use more if and when we upgrade to the R5, because I'll be using that camera for stills far more often than I currently do with the R. So I think this will kind of start to get a renewed lease of life with that new body.
Do you think if you were able to put it on a C300 style of camera or C200 style of camera, that would be really where you'd be wanting to use that lens? It's always felt a little bit to me like a lens that doesn't actually fit the stills style.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, one presumes that eventually that will happen. I can completely understand. Yeah. I know Phil's mentioned this a few times. He sees it as a disadvantage that the Cinema EOS cameras haven't adopted the RF mount. I kind of feel like it's way too early. If you look at the longevity of lenses, how long the typical user, end user hangs on to these lenses and the lifespan of them, it's decades. Even once you've passed them on, the lenses that I sold years ago when I temporarily left Canon's clutches, they'll be living on somewhere, probably dancing through a meadow as I speak in the sunshine, living a lovely life free. There's some kind of weird version of Toy Story playing out in my mind
Yes,
right
exactly.
now.
I was literally picturing the same thing. We cut away to a montage.
A new child has taken them home to play with them. But if you look at the longevity of lenses and the lifespan of them, it would be crazy to literally only he's been saying it for a while now. So, at the time when he first sort of mentioned this, I seem to remember the R had only been out about 18 months or so. So, that's no time at all really to just suddenly say, oh, by the way, everyone, you now have to get RF lenses. I think it's sensible the way that they've done it. I think the time scale, not that I know ultimately when this might change or if it might change with the Cinema EOS line, but whatever it is, I think it's sensible that it's not, a year or 2 years. I think it does need to be much slower. They're still building out the range. I mean, they're adding RF lenses all the time. So I think you need to have an alternative. There needs to be a matched kind of lens for each EF lens before you even start to think about transitioning. The other thing is that the price point of those cinema cameras, they're not the type of price point that I'm sure there are people, but there aren't many people that would just go out first camera, just starting out in their filmmaking career and go and splash, 8, 10, 15, or more £1,000 on a camera body. I think the type of people that are buying these cameras are already existing filmmakers who have been in the business a while and already have therefore a big stock of EF lenses. And it would be quite a slap in the face to just say to them, you can't, those lenses have now essentially devalued or they've become, redundant. They are bridging the gap. And I do think that things like the adapters, so we've got the control ring adapter here, which is just the standard RF to EF adapter, but it gives the electronic communication ring, which you can configure to do whatever you like, but most likely you would configure it to be aperture or iris. And then the Vari-ND version of it, which has a built-in Vari-ND, which I'm sure people have heard of this, but it's quite incredible, this little device. So it gives you a little tiny little wheel on the side of it and gives you a variable ND that's obviously rear mounted behind the lens, which means you can just swap the lenses out. Annoyingly about this is obviously it's an adapter, so it's great when you're using EF lenses with the R or any camera with an RF mount on it. But obviously you don't have that functionality with any RF lens, and it's not like you could just change the front to be RF, because then the flange distance would be wrong. So annoyingly, this only works with EF lenses. I sound like someone who's like, give me everything. But this is so, when you use this, it's so cool. You end up just thinking, it's a shame that there's nothing like this for the RF lenses I have, obviously. For obvious reasons. But yeah, no, I do think that this lens, you're right, it's big and heavy. It's something that would probably make more sense to be on a bigger bodied camera, but who knows what's coming along. I have no idea what Canon are working on in the future. But one presumes that their plan is not to maintain two entirely separate lens mount types forever. So eventually one presumes that everything will be RF, but who knows?
Who knows? I think it's very easy to the official line right now is that, they are both two lines. This will now be two lines. But yeah, I think you're right. I think slowly it will go over. But the nice thing about EF is that lens mount adapters will always exist. So even if, let's say today, Canon say, right, no more EF, just finishing EF. No more EF lenses will ever be made. You will always be able to put these on a RF mount camera or on another brand's camera, on a Micro Four Thirds camera, on Sony's E-mount cameras, on whatever you want, because EF is designed around a very big flange distance. And so with the end of the lens being here, the end of the sensor has to be back here somewhere. So you've got a lot of space to play with adapters. And so, indeed. Yes, it's never going to be around forever, or at least we strongly suspect that EF is not going to be around forever and the RF will take over in time. I think EF lenses will actually be around forever because lenses don't get old. Lenses don't get replaced. Lenses, until they break, people are still using old lenses, used vintage lenses from the 50s and 60s and everything.
It's crazy to think that some of these lenses may well be bought. It's crazy to think some of these lenses may well be bought in future years by, a new generation. Like, I've got that vintage EF. and we'll all
so
be like,
soft.
I remember those were right, mate.
I remember when that was the sharpest lens on the market.
Yeah, they're I think it's the beginning of a new phase of lens development. I think we should embrace the RF lens for what they are and what they're doing. They are all consistently better, both optically, in terms of weight, in terms of size, often aperture, often extra features like IS. In pretty much all ways, they're better than their EF counterparts. So they are. This RF lens is a system is allowing Canon to do some really cool things with their lens technology, and I think that's great because they've already proven how good they are at EF lenses. The EF lenses stand up against pretty much any other brand you care to mention of stills lenses. So if they're pushing the envelope and moving up a gear with the RF, then great, fantastic. I think it's a huge. Hugely positive thing for anyone that's involved with using Canon products, whether stills or video. And let's not forget, Canon two years ago now, Canon celebrated 140 million lenses shipping. So there are a lot of lenses out there. And so when we talk about ecosystem, I mean, there isn't really. I should qualify this. I don't know this for a fact, but I strongly suspect that there isn't a lens type or a manufacturer of a lens that has such a huge amount of lenses that have been manufactured. It's just massive.
They probably are the biggest.
I'm sure it must be. I mean, yeah, God knows what it is now. It was 140 million a couple of years ago. But, and as I said, that in itself is reassuring because it creates a very healthy secondhand market. Which means that your lenses don't become completely devoid of any value the minute that a new camera comes out, or you stupidly decide to go to a different camera brand and then come back again and rebuy all your lenses.
Who would do that?
Who would do that? Rental is another big one. I had someone say to me recently, "Oh, that's really annoying. Then, so you have to buy, an 85mm RF lens for when you want an 85mm on your EOS R." And and an 85mm for your C200, you've got to literally rebuy every lens. It's like, well, no one has two sets of the same lenses, and if you have two cameras, if it was a 5D Mark IV and you had the EF, you wouldn't go and buy two of the same lens so you can put two EF lenses on those bodies. It's just not, it works. That's what rental's there for. If you want matched lenses, if you want the same focal length on both cameras, you've got multiple cameras, who owns multiple sets? I don't think anyone would own multiple of the same lens. That's what rental's there for anyway. So being able to and renting let's say an 85mm, renting an 85mm EF lens is going to be dirt cheap relatively when we look at how much we spend on rental for shoots, because there's just so many of them out there and the availability is so good. So it's reassuring that there's that ecosystem there because of the knock-on effect of rental availability, of costs, and therefore second-hand value as well. So, these lenses, they last a lifetime, really.
Absolutely. Have we got any other lenses in your collection down there that we haven't mentioned? I'm not sure we spoke about the 35, have we?
We haven't yet. I'm going to come to that one last because it's my favourite.
Plan.
I'm teasing you. So the 2870. I've shown you I've got the 24-105, which is, I believe, the kit lens that came with the R. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Carl.
No, pretty sure it was. Yep.
IS, good autofocus, nice and lightweight actually, and given the zoom range, it's a relatively lightweight lens. It's actually really useful. This is f4. Again, this is a good kind of utility lens. Obviously, it's a kit lens. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to be good for scenarios.
To clarify that, I think there were two options. I think kit lens is probably not particularly fair on the lens. There were two options. There was I'm just trying to look up what it is, a variable aperture option for the EOS R.
Yes, there was, a cheaper
and
one. Then
that was like the more expensive kit lens, if you like. It said you can buy the kit lens or you can bundle the camera with the proper L mount 24-105.
I apologise to all 24-105 owners.
Exactly.
I did not mean to disparage it by referring to it as a kit lens. It's a very good lens. I just remember it came with my R, so that's why.
I think they've stopped the R. I think it's only the RP that comes with the cheaper one now.
Doing that as well, yeah.
I think they have stopped it, yeah.
Do you know, are you going to do kit options with R5 and R6? Are you already advertising kit
I haven't seen any. I've only seen the body.
Yeah.
So I think that, because they never really did kit with a lot of their much more. I think the 5D was the top of their line DSLR that had a kit lens, I believe. I don't think the 1Ds or the 1DXs had a kit lens or a lens bundle with them. Presumably because just they go to such a variety of photographers that the photographer wants to choose which lens to go with it.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, if there's anyone watching who's got deposit down or is planning on purchasing an R5 or an R6 and they're just starting in the whole adventure of RF lenses, if there's anyone there thinking, well, what lens should I buy first? Which is always really tricky. You know, what do you buy first? What's the first lens? The temptation is to get something that will cover multiple bases. Obviously, the zoom lenses are great, and that 24-105 is a great option if you want something that covers a lot of bases. But I personally, because zoom lenses are normally the cheapest and most widely available, particularly the Holy Trinity zoom lenses, available at rental companies, I personally, and they're built like bombs as well. They're so not like bombs. They're built to be bomb-proof, is what I mean to say. They're built like bombs. They are really good. Their rental life is really good, so that you tend to have them in good working order. Personally, and this is just me, I would probably spend my first money on a really nice prime that can be a go-to for a lot of situations. And there are two candidates that I would suggest. If you've got the money for it, I would recommend the 50-1.2. The 50mm 1.2. It's a really, really sharp and beautiful lens. It's up there with probably one of the best portrait lenses that Canon have ever made. It's absolutely stunning. The optical clarity of this lens is just gorgeous. Really, really lovely. Having said that, my absolute favourite by a country mile is the 35mm prime. The reason why I love the 35mm RF is it's got built-in image stabilization, which is fantastic. As I said, I shoot handheld an awful lot, and in fact, I did a couple of videos for Canon last year about pairing the EOS R with the C200, and I was shooting with the EOS R handheld the entire time, just a side grip on the camera, and mostly using either the 85mm with the image stabilization turned on, the EF, in combination with the very ND adapter, or this 35mm with the image stabilization turned on. Really great image stabilization. It's macro, which is lovely. I've always loved having lenses that are also macro. It just gives an extra kind of ace up your sleeve if you ever need it. If I'm doing any product work, any close-up product work, then this is a lovely lens to do that with. It's incredibly lightweight. It's ridiculous how light this is. It feels verging on cheap and plasticky, dare I say it. It's not at all. It's got a lovely finish, just like all the RF lenses, but it's because it's not this kind of brick that these other ones are. It's easy to kind of think. Yeah, it's easy to think, oh well, it's one of their cheapy ones. It really, like, in terms of how it performs, it's incredible. Really beautiful image. I love how sharp this is. I love 35mm as a focal length. If I'm going to speak broadly and generically about focal length, I do love 35mm. It's really nice, kind of reportage focal length. Really nice for kind of getting B-roll, and because it's macro, if you want to move in really closely and get something, it's a really nice lens to do that with. We also tend to leave this on our EOS R because we use it so often, and also because we tend most often to use our EOS R in combination with our C200 as a B cam on a gimbal. So this on the EOS R on a Ronin, Ronin S, or is it the SC, the smaller one? Yes. Which is the one we've got. It's great. It's a perfect combination. Really lightweight, very nice focal length, I think, for gimbal work. I get a bit bored of seeing really wide gimbal shots. and it's very difficult to get good stuff with obviously long focal length on gimbal. So that 35 is quite a nice look to it. It's just slightly different to the typical gimbal shots you see. I can't speak highly enough of the 35mm, and I was surprised before we went on air that you said you hadn't really used this much. I urge you to get one.
Oh, I definitely will. I think it's an interesting lens because Canon, it's not the same as the other RF lenses. Doesn't look the same. It's not the same size. It hasn't got the red ring around the front. All of that sort of stuff. Canon sort of singled it out in that launch as being sort of almost the affordable one. Yeah, and I think because of that, I was just trying to rack my brains just to think when I've used it before, and I think we were saying before, the only time I've actually used it was the very first time I picked up an EOS R in the pre-disclosure meetings, when that was the lens that Canon happened to have put on it because it was coming out at the same time. And since then, I just don't think I've actually really gone back and had a proper look at it. And so I'm really pleased to hear you talking so positively about it. I think it's definitely something that I should go back and look. I mean, do you see much quality difference at all compared to the L series ones, if you like, the ones with the classic red ring?
Do you know what? There's and this is one of the lovely things about lenses. There's always those oddities. There's always those ones like I think it was the 1855 EFS lens.
The F2,
always stood out. Everyone was like, "Oh, that's got L series glass in it." That has. It's like, people on street corners like, "That's the one to get." No one realizes. I don't know. I feel like the 35mm is one of those kind of oddities. It's not just as good as, it's incredibly sharp. It's beautiful across the whole image as well. Edge to edge, pin sharp, even wide open. I've read other reviews of this lens as well, and similarly, the results are really high. It stacks up incredibly well, if not one of the best sharp lenses across the image circle of all of them. And I don't know why it's not got a red ring around it. I don't know why it's relatively cheap compared to the others. But I would say it's one of those oddities that just exists in the world, and those in the know snap them up, use them.
Absolutely. No, I think it's definitely one I'll be taking a much, much closer look at. Okay.
Now, what I don't have here, there's an elephant in the room here. I've already said I don't really shoot much stills, and yet I only own stills lenses.
Well, let's talk about some video lenses. So here next to me, I've got a C500 Mark II with a Sumire on it, which are a lovely set of prime lenses. And I think up here, I've got one of their compact cine servo zooms. So these are their, they've got an 18 to 80 and a 70 to 200. I mean, I haven't. This isn't mine, Ollie.
Just kicking around.
It's just one I brought from home, no. But these are obviously video lenses rather than what we've talked about so far, which are stills lenses. Have you used either of these styles of lenses? Ollie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I've used the 1855 Cine servo zoom? Is that
18 to 80?
Yes, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I'm thinking of the last thing I was talking about. I've used that one quite a bit. I don't own it. I've used it because other people I know have it, and I use it when I'm working with them. And I love it. It's great. Because of the stuff that we shoot, I personally, and this is just me being odd, and let's not forget I'm not a DP, so I'm really not one to kind of focus too much on the operation side of things, but I've never really got on well with shooting on the shoulder. It's just not something. Ergonomically, I know it makes sense. I like the extra points of contact. I love how free for moving around it enables you to be. But just physically, I just don't get on with it. I've got a terrible back. If any part of my body is in one position for too long, it hurts immediately. I'm feeling my age. So I just don't shoot on the shoulder. And I think those lenses, those Cine servos, they're great, sort of broadcast documentary style shoulder mounts, that you can get them with the hand controls on them. I think they're great for that style, and everyone I know who has them for that reason loves them for that reason. That's just not the stuff that I personally shoot or the way I like to work. The Cinema Primes and the Sumires, it's a different story. I do use those. I use them a lot, and I think, like a lot of people probably watching this, there's no way on earth that I could afford them. So they are very much a rental object for me. I rent them in. I occasionally have toyed with the notion of getting a set of them, but I just don't think that we would get as much use out of them. For people who don't know, my company, we're a corporate film production company. We're not doing any drama. I never have first ACs working with me pulling focus. Their cine lineup are very much about production level, geared, 300-degree rotation, standard 114 mil diameter for being heavily rigged up and taking out of, past the matte box without having to reconfigure the rig. They're all designed for obviously cinema level production, which, although we try our best, we don't do that type of work, quite frankly.
Well,
when
that's what
I
it
am
comes
doing
down
something,
to.
Yeah, sorry. When I do need to do something a bit more that way, I do hire them in, and I do love them. I've been using the CNE EF Cine Primes for years. They're lovely, and the Sumires I've tried once, and I've seen loads of stuff that's come from colleagues and acquaintances of mine who work. In cinematography, people like Brett Danton, who have used the Sumires extensively. And I do love the look. I've graded loads of stuff, actually, that's been shot with things that have used the Sumires, and I do love the look of them. They give a really nice kind of unpolished look to otherwise what can look quite sharp imagery. So, they're something that, if the narrative, if the storyboarding, if the project kind of required it, we would hire in. But when you're investing your own money, you need to think about what's the majority of the stuff that we're shooting, what can we save money by owning instead of renting, and that's, unfortunately, that's where the line gets drawn with our production company, is we don't own any of those Cine Primes. But as I say, use them a lot. Love them.
I have this conversation a lot with customers as to when you should step up to lenses like this, and I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there in terms of what's going to save you more money. In your situation right now, not buying these would save you money because you don't have use to use them you don't have the amount of jobs where you want to be using these come up often enough that it would cost you less to buy than it does to rent. Whereas lots of customers I speak to, they would end up renting so often that if they do that for a couple of jobs, then they might as well have bought some.
Absolutely.
And so for those customers, absolutely.
And what's changed also, of course, we have to bear in mind that the 300 Mark III, the 500 Mark II, with the very easy interchangeable mount, means that you have now got very easy access to put PL lenses, which of course there's even more PL glass out there than there is in terms of cine lenses than there is EF. So that makes rental even more accessible. There's even more options out there. So it very much depends on the individual. I love the lenses, really, really love them. And I'd love to be shooting the type of stuff that required them more often. But there you go. This is the reality of it. The other big thing, of course, is that the stills lenses have the autofocus. As I say, I don't think I've ever worked. No, I've never worked with a focus puller. I've never worked with a first AC. I've never needed to. It's not the stuff that we do. If I got a project that required that the brief meant that we wanted that type of look and we were moving up to cinema lenses, which occasionally we do, then we would need to hire someone to kind of bring that in to facilitate that. But actually, the stuff that we've done thus far hasn't required that. The focus guide on the newer cameras, the EOS R, the 300 Mark III, the 500 Mark II, and the C200, the focus guide for manual lenses is fantastic. It's really good. So you can pull focus very straightforwardly, and it's using the as we know, incredible dual pixel autofocus for the feedback of when that area is in focus. So it's much more accurate than focus peaking as well. So I've used when I have used the cine lenses, I've used them in with that mode, with the focus guide mode. With the stills lenses, though, obviously that opens up touch autofocus on the R. We've got the touch and drag autofocus. You can adjust the speed. With the 500 Mark II and the 300 Mark III, you've got these slightly more organic roll-off as well with the focus racking. So if you are tapping to move focus, it feels far more like the way that a focus puller would rack focus. And that's a lovely thing to have as a small crew or single camera operator, to just be able to tap the screen and do that. That's something that these stills lenses opens up for you. So and the tracking autofocus, that's an incredible thing. It's incredible now with the equipment we own now. It looks mind blowing on the R5 and the R6. So that's something that is unlocked by the stills lenses.
For pretty much Canon users across the board now, right down from the RP and even the M50 all the way up to the C500 and C700 level, autofocus is absolutely becoming something that they are now using, even in some small capacity, or just using it all the time like I do. It is definitely something that's being used. And I think that's why these lenses have... I wouldn't say been really popular. It's not like every Canon user owns these lenses. They're quite expensive lenses. And as you say, for some people like yourself, these cine servos, they don't really fit your way of shooting. But I think I've got several customers that absolutely love these lenses, and I think the reason that they love them is because they are a sensible zoom range, and so they cover it. They don't care a huge amount about the max aperture. They probably don't like stopping down beyond f2.8 or f4 anyway, and so having it limited at f4 or T4.4 isn't too much of a big deal for them, because it is usable that wide open. And having that full autofocus control is a really nice combination. We had a question from James Dobson, who says, what do you think of these? I haven't got my hands on them, but the zoom rocker looks quite cramped on the hand. Annoyingly, this one hasn't got the zoom rocker attached, James. But then I don't find them that cramped.
No, they're not. They're really good size. I mean, they're not like the old school, like big rockers that you practically kind of used your whole hand for. They're more nimble than that, but I've got big hands, and I've never found them to be too small when I've worked with them. It's actually I would love to shoot that way. I just physically can't. And a lot of the stuff we do is more kind of we do an awful lot of brand documentary type work, as I've discussed with you before, Carl. So actually it would lend itself to the type of work that we do, but for me, it just doesn't work out with my rickety old bones. But they are really nice in operation.
And also, with your sort of work, it's the sort of work where you can choose the lens for the shot a little bit more. You've got the time is probably the wrong word, because you are normally pushed for time, but that's part of the process, is being able to swap your lenses out and about, whereas these are very popular with people who just don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. We adopt a documentary style, but for corporate branded content. So it's still very much planned and storyboarded. And so, we know our shot types, we know our framing in advance. It's not true documentary where it's reactive. And that's obviously where those lenses are invaluable.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of bit more specific questions. Okay. For example, Jonathan is asking about the f2 28-70 that you've been speaking about. He says, is it less practical than the 24-70? And if you had to choose one, which one and why? I guess it is less practical, isn't it? It's bigger. It's bigger. It doesn't have IS, whereas the RF one does have IS.
I would choose the 2.8 24-70 every day of the week. Yeah, it's a far more practical lens. The IS in it is great. I'm not sure of the weight differences, but I'll be surprised if there's much in it. I would go with the 24-70. Like I said, it does leave me wondering really where this fits. I think for this lens, it's all about, do you need f2? If you're shooting weddings, for example, if you're in low light, and you need that extra stop of kind of flexibility, then go with this lens. But for more general, covering more bases, giving you IS, I personally, I would quite happily sacrifice that stop and get the 2.8 24-70 personally.
Yeah, I think the 28-70 is not a lens for people who want convenience, because really when you're talking about zooms versus primes, a lot of the reason that people are choosing primes is because of the convenience factor. And the 28-70 is just not a lens that you would choose when you're looking for that convenience factor.
I may well be overstepping the mark here, but I feel like this was a statement lens. It was one of the first ones that they released for RF. I think it was Canon saying, we can do that. We can make a very, very optically superior f2 lens that's 28 to 70 zoom, and I think it was more of a statement of what can be achieved with the engineering behind these lenses, and possibly, and I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn, possibly actually didn't think too much about the use cases for that particular lens, but that's just my own potential interpretation of it.
I think it reminds me almost of more like a cinema lens, where it's not about the convenience, it's about the quality of it and all the rest of it. Yeah. I do think that if in the future at some point we do see a cinema style body with an RF mount on it, all of a sudden that's going to change massively, and that lens is going to be a great option for those.
Well, particularly with paired with the C500 Mark II, which is a great camera in low light. That could be a really interesting, a very bright lens with a good focal length in dark situations with a camera that's very good in low light. That could be a really interesting combination. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
If Canon do eventually do that.
Elliot has asked on Facebook, are primes more for shots that take longer to set up, where zoom lenses are more for run and gun? And this is the age-old debate, the convenience of zooms versus the image quality of primes. Is it, for you in your work, is it as simple as you use prime lenses when you've got a bit more time and you use zoom lenses when you're run and gunning, if you like?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, the 16-35, it's less like that with. I think because of that focal range, I think it is a bit more. Yes, it speeds things up, but that type of focal length for us is often establishing stuff which actually we plan quite a lot of detail. Possibly it's just because we don't have anything that wide as a prime. Is probably, as I'm saying, that's probably why. But I do like the extra flexibility with those wider lenses. I think the 24-70 is one of the ones we use least often, but because of the style that we shoot, I think if we were more run and gun, like every wedding photographer or videographer has the 24-70 permanently on their body, it's one of those kind of lenses that's perfect for very run and gun, recomposing the shots. Yeah, I mean it's a bit simplistic, but it's certainly true that the zoom lenses are going to speed things up. But you're sacrificing to a certain extent how bright they are and the optical kind of clarity of it. It's no coincidence that my three favorite lenses in front of me are all primes. Yeah,
absolutely. I personally, I love working on primes. I try and work with primes as much as possible. So I try and make going to the zooms like the 24-70, for example, I try and only go to those when I really need to. I go, okay, I can't actually do this, what I'm trying to do here, whatever it may be, on a prime. I'm just going to get caught out. I try and do it that way around, but
it is too simple to say that it's just you just use a zoom for run and gun. For example, the EF 100 to 400, periodically, again, it's a lens that we rent in, but love that lens and specifically rent it in for specific shots that we have in mind. We were doing a bunch of stuff, I think it's probably 2 years ago now, very specifically hired in that lens for the types of shots it would allow us to do for some landscape stuff that we were getting. So, there's a perfect example of a time where we were planning the shots and we got a zoom lens in order to achieve those shots. I think once you start getting beyond the 100 mil, 200 mil, once you're kind of looking at stuff that way, I don't think that's the type of stuff, unless it's sports where it's kind of unplanned reactive. They're so big, you kind of thinking a little bit more about the shots you're getting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to see how it being a telephoto lens changes the way that it works, because I think a lot of the advantages of using a prime lens go away when you're going really telephoto. You don't need the shallow depth of field from the lower aperture anymore, because all of a sudden you're so telephoto that everything's shallow depth of field anyway, or you're normally focusing on something in the distance, which everything will be deep anyway because you're near infinity. And also, if you're doing really far away stuff like landscapes, like you were just talking about, often diffraction and atmosphere and things like that make more of a difference than the image quality of the lens anyway. So going from a variable aperture one to a, say, 600 millimeter f4, I think often the convenience of going for a telly is something that wins out for a lot of customers.
I mean, it's that person who's asked that question is probably more likely that they're thinking around those kind of 24, 70, 7200 kind of
absolutely.
zooms. Yep. And you know, not all zooms are created equal, or all lenses are created equal, obviously, but you know, there's a lot of cheaper lenses that just are kind of unusable wide open, so they might advertise as a certain, you know, maximum aperture, but really when you get them in your hands, the image degrades to the point where it's not really usable to use them at those kind of maximum apertures, and you have to stop down anyway. One of the lovely things about Canon's all of Canon's lenses is they put a huge amount of effort into minimizing that. You know, the 70-200 is legendary for being just as sharp wide open as it is at any other f-stop. So I think that's another thing for them to bear in mind is, you know, yes, generally speaking, optical quality is sacrificed with zooms compared to primes, but there are some zooms, obviously the more expensive ones, but they are engineered so well that actually a lot of those compromises don't exist in those particular zoom lenses. So like anything, you kind of get what you pay for. Absolutely.
I've just had a question here from one that I'd quite like to answer about cine primes, to change topic a little bit there. Greetings, what is the most significant difference, without mentioning the PL mount, between the CN Prime EF and the Sumire Prime? So firstly, I would just say we have done a stream going on depth on Canon cinema lenses with Barry Griffin, actually from Canon. So if you want to know lots more details than we're going to go into here, definitely go back through our streams and look up that one, because Barry knows his stuff on lenses. It's definitely worth listening to him speak on it. You mentioned you've graded quite a lot of differences between them, Ollie. Have you noticed much difference in terms of image quality? Is there anything there you can talk about with those two different lenses?
Yeah, it's quite distinctive actually. It's, you know, unusually for Canon when these came out. I think you know, for a lot of us it was a bit of a shock because they are very characteristic. You know, they've taken what was kind of interesting about like their K12s and they've kind of engineered this into a new lens. There's coatings that have been removed. They've not gone as far as, you know, is it Sigma's Classics, which are, you know, really flary. They're not that far. They're not that characterful, I should say. But there are coatings that have been removed. There are, you know, elements that have been removed to kind of reintroduce a little bit of character. And what we're talking about really is kind of aberrations, really. The things that for decades the entire industry was moving towards removing aberrations and removing characters and optical flaws from these lenses. And as that's been partnered side by side as with increasing resolutions, it's got to this point now where actually a lot of people don't like that clean, ultra crisp look, and they actually want a little bit of that kind of fuzziness. And it's a hugely, you know, it's about taste really, but it's a hugely popular look right now. And in terms of grading, quite often now we'll be asked as colorists to, even if they've not used lenses like the Sumires, will be asked to introduce optical aberrations or kind of you know, things that look like they could be optical aberrations to kind of bring the look of the image down, your mid-tone detail, bringing it down in skin. One of the things that strikes me about a great show on Netflix called Sex Education, if you look, particularly in the first season, but it's there in the second season too, pretty much every single shot there's a very subtle vignette, and as it transitions from the outer edges to the inner edges of the shots, they've just very slightly split apart the RGB, and so they're essentially kind of creating like a misaligned lens element look from an old vintage lens. You know, it's something that's being introduced stylistically in post-production these days, and I think responding to that at the hardware level and removing some of these things that have been put in place over the years to create ultra sharp lenses, I think it's a really nice thing. I think it gives people options, and the Sumire lenses are, as I say, it seemed kind of a little bit out of character for Canon, but it was really nice to see them responding to the demands of DPs and productions and actually bring out these lenses. So yeah, I think they have a distinct look to them.
I think there's obviously these sort of two schools of thought in lens design, isn't there? There's are we trying to make a lens that's as good as we can make within the budget and the focal ranges that we're going for, or are we trying to replicate a look of some kind? Are we trying to do something a little bit more creative when we're making this lens? And the Sumire's definitely seem to be the one in Canon's lineup that does that the most. I often get customers trying to compare them to like Cook and saying, oh, they're like Canon's versions of like what Cook are doing. Like, well, yes, in that Cook also tend to prioritize the look and the feel of the lens rather than the perfection of the lens. But I mean, once you start doing that, it's then all about what that look is. And I think these have a very different look to Cook's look.
Yeah. No, I think they've
both absolutely have their place.
Yeah, they've set out to recreate the look of their vintage K12s,
Yes.
not the Cooks, and I think they've done a really good job of that. I think they're great lenses. Really, they're really nice.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think that is a good place to round it up for today, shall we? We've hit the hour mark. I think lenses is just one of those subjects where it's a real minefield because you can get into the technicalities of each one, or you can just talk broadly. It's a topic that I think we could come back to several times if we needed to. If anyone has any more questions that they would like us to answer or Ollie to answer, just leave them in the comment section down below, and we'll do our best to get back to those. But yeah, I mean, has actually sitting down and thinking about your lenses made you want to do anything different, Ollie, or are you very happy with your selection?
I think it has actually been quite cathartic. I do definitely.
It never happens, does it? You never actually stop and go, right, hang on, what lenses am I using and why am I using them?
An international day of the lens where everyone just sits with their lenses and just admires them for a minute. Now, I feel like
reflection day.
I definitely feel like I want to get rid of our 2870 RF and replace it with the new 2470. That's been on my kind of list for a while now, and I think it'd be really nice actually to get to the holy trinity of zoom lenses: the 1535, 2470, and 7200 f2.8 RF lenses. I really want to get those. It makes sense to invest a bit more money into them now as we're moving forwards and planning on upgrading to the R5. So, I think that's something that we should be doing. Interestingly, I've got a job that's coming up in August with one of our clients they came to me saying, we actually want some stills. I was like, okay. And my background years ago was in stills. I did, stills in the early part of my education. I'm perfectly capable of doing stills, but it's not something that we offer. And I was like, fine, that's absolutely fine. I said, well, would you be happy if we kind of got some little bits of video as well at the same time, just to kind of show you what's possible and maybe kind of you can see the benefits of getting more video on your social media? And they're like, of course, that would be amazing. And one of the things that I think would be great going forwards, and I don't know if it'll work out for this job, but it's the thing we're hearing more and more often, particularly as people are being a bit more conservative with budgets, is what would be great for that customer, I thought, is if we had the R5, we could stick it in the 8K RAW mode and just get like a programmed with like a second shooter or something, get a programmed product shot, maybe a 10-second bit of motion. They've got a cool idea about having their product around in different geographical locations around where they're based, because where they're based is part of what kind of makes their products different to others and the competitors. And taking 35 megapixel stills from those 10-second product videos is something that's really interesting. Kill two birds with one stone. That's one of the interesting things that I think might be useful for that mode with the R5 if we do go that route. Although generally we will no doubt just use it for 4K. That's what we do at the moment with the R5, but without the crop. Yay!
Exactly. No, I'm very much looking forward to playing that more. And you mentioned upgrading your RF lenses. Is it because of how good these cameras are getting now that you're wanting to invest so much in lenses which can't be used on your A camera? Because that's an interesting line, isn't it?
It is. Every time I invest money in an RF lens, there is a part of me that's like, I can't use that with my main cinema camera. But I kind of feel like we've got so many bases covered with our 4 EF lenses that we have, and we've kind of, you get used to shooting with what you own, and you work to that kind of way. I feel like, you know, we go from 16 to 85 with the lenses we own. That's perfectly decent for the majority of the stuff we do. I think with the RF lenses, although it's like, well, I can't use that with that camera body at the moment, I feel like, you know, we invest in these lenses for decades, not months. So time will tell whether or not they become usable with those other types of cameras. And I think particularly as we're, you know, for say the R5 and whatever comes beyond, because we, you know, obviously bodies we upgrade frequently and lenses we don't. I think, you know, if you've got a camera that's shooting at these much higher resolutions and capable of shooting at those resolutions, it stands to reason that you try and up the optical quality of what you're working with them, even if ultimately you try and pare that back in post. You know, I think it's good to capture a master file that's as optically clear as possible, and they are optically superior to their EF counterparts in most ways. So it stands to reason to pursue that as our bodies get better, as the resolutions get higher and compression gets lower. I mean, the data rates on the R5 are astronomical. So I do think that a good, strong, clear lens is worth that investment.
I completely agree. I think it's a very interesting point. So thank you very much for joining us, Ollie. As always, we will be doing more of these very, very soon. Yeah, I think we need to get a play with an R5. It's probably the next one, right?
Yeah, and we'll put the 35mm on it and kill two birds with one stone. You'll get to play with 35mm.
And I will play with that.
Nice.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone who was watching this. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you once again to Ollie, and I will see you all in the next one.
Cheers.
XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/xswd. The MKE600 is a shotgun microphone ideal for professional video camera applications. Maximal rejection of ambient side noises thanks to pronounced directivity. And because the MKE600 has a very good suppression of structure-borne noise, it makes one of the most versatile all-round shotgun microphones on the market.
The new Super 35 sensor that Canon have introduced with the C200 Mark III is quite a big step up from other S35 sensors that they have created before. From the body and the flexibility that gives us in terms of the expansion packs and the interchangeable mount, to the sensor with its increased dynamic range for tackling scenes that possibly we couldn't have tackled or captured faithfully before, I can get more out of this camera. My money goes further. It's as simple as that from a business standpoint. from a creative point of view, it's unquestionably unlocking more creative avenues for us as filmmakers.